Good afternoon. This is a program brought to you by Spark, Friends of Riverbank Park. And today we are going to be talking about the history of this park, which celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. And we will be talking about the beginning of the park, how it was begun, and how we managed to hang on to this park in the face of some development threats. We were supposed to have Dr. Price here with us this afternoon, but Dr. Price had some family emergency call him away, so he will not be with us, but we are very proud to have Ulana with us. Ulana Zakalak is a historic preservationist in the state of New Jersey. She is well known in the circles of historic preservation. She is someone without whom this park would not exist. She was the person who wrote the application for this park to get put onto the National Historic Register. And I'm sure she's going to tell you a little bit about how she and Spark had to persist in order to get this to be placed on the historic register, and eventually in 1998. It was a battle. Ulana is working and has worked in Newark before on a number of different projects all over the city. And one in our neighborhood, St. Casimir's Church, was added to the National Historic Register with Ulana's assistance on that application. It's not easy to get onto the National Historic Register. It's a specific job, and it has to be prepared in a certain way, and it requires many proofs of why a place is historically significant. It requires an expert to put it all together, and that is the person that we have with us this afternoon, and we're very pleased to have Ulana Zakalak here. Ulana, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to my park. By the way, in case you didn't know, I own this park. But really, it would be more accurate to say that this park owns me. It is part of my character, my soul, it is my passion, and it is my proudest achievement, having been part of the effort to save it from destruction. 10 years ago, I was working at St. Casimir's Church, not too far away from here. I was working on a landmark designation for the church when I was approached by John Dviboroshin with news about Riverbank Park. He told me that the park was slated for demolition, that it was chosen as the site of a new minor league baseball stadium and a soccer stadium, and its destruction was imminent. As I listened to him speak passionately about the park, about how he and his family enjoyed the park, I became more and more interested in the curious deal of Essex County and the city of Newark choosing a county park as the site of a baseball stadium. I knew the park was an Olmsted park, as were most of the parks in Essex County, and I was at a loss to understand how these officials could take a park from the people and turn it over to private development, especially a park designed by the preeminent landscape design firm in the country, the Olmsted brothers, sons of the father of American landscape architecture, Frederick Law Olmsted. I agreed to help the fledgling Spark organization and the Newark Preservation and Landmarks Committee designate the park a state and national landmark. Little did I know at that time that I too was to become part of the history of Riverbank Park, but I will let Nancy tell that story. My job today is to tell you about how Riverbank Park came to be over 100 years ago. The idea for Riverbank Park, and indeed the entire Essex County park system, began at a World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. The world's Columbian Exposition, also called the Chicago's World's Fair, was designed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus coming to the New World. An entire city was planned with buildings designed by the most famous architects of the time and a landscape plan by Frederick Law Olmsted, the most notable landscape architect of the time. In the minds of the designers of this World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition was the prototype of what they felt the American city should be. It was designed to follow Beaux-Arts principles of design, namely European classical architectural principles based on symmetry and balance. The exposition covered more than 600 acres, featured nearly 200 new buildings of European architecture, canals, lagoons, and people and cultures from around the world. Over 27 million people, about the half of the United States population, attended the exposition over the 6 months it was open. Its scale and grandeur far exceeded other World's Fair of the time. Along with the exposition buildings, there were an area set aside for amusements, including the world's first Ferris wheel. The fair was illuminated by electricity, the first use of public lighting in the country, and the exposition halls featured displays of American ingenuity. Some of the most famous firsts that were introduced at the fair included Cracker Jacks, Aunt Jemima pancake mix, cream of wheat cereal, shredded wheat cereal, juicy fruit gum, and the hamburger. Visitors to the fair were as impressed with the gleaming white buildings and the electricity that they labeled the fair the White City, and that was a nickname that stayed with the Chicago Fair. The buildings were built in classical styles with Greek and Roman detailing such as domes, arches, and arcades. All of the cornice lines were at the same height as the fair, which stressed scale, harmony, and ensemble as dominant themes. The landscapes were greatly admired as ways to beautify the city. And you're wondering, what does this fair have to do with Riverbank Park? Well, architects and municipal officials from the entire country flocked to the fair to see how the ideas brought forward at the exposition could benefit their cities. After all, the 1890s were an incredible turning point in American society, and especially for American cities. American agrarian society had moved from the forefront of development into this nostalgic past. The poor began flocking to the urban centers where conditions were not favorable for living. They were forced to live in unlit, unventilated tenements. Labor laws were non-existent, and social unrest was always bubbling under the surface of society. As transportation developed, the upper class moved to the suburbs, abandoning the inner cities to the poor. As the divide between rich and poor became greater, social tensions exploded, first in the Chicago Haymarket riot of 1886, where union organizers clashed with police, leaving many dead, and the Pullman strike of 1894, when the U.S. Army was called in to quell violence, when Pullman railroad workers were forced to accept a 28% decline in wages. A general depression hit the United States in 1893, which lasted 4 difficult years, further straining living conditions for the poor. Progressive politicians concerned with urban violence saw the beauty of the White City and thought that if they reformed their physical cities with landscapes, they could control the poor. The reform of landscapes would lead inhabitants to civic and moral virtue, and that beauty could be an effective social control device and bring urban moral order. This philosophy of beauty taming the urban centers of the United States, as shown in the Chicago's World's Fair, became known as the City Beautiful movement. And Newark was not immune to this movement. Essex County and Newark City officials traveled to the Chicago Fair to see what ideas they could bring back to the city. Among those who traveled was State Assemblyman Franklin Murphy, whose Murphy Varnish Works was located only several blocks away from where we are today, and the factory still stands. Murphy and his fellow legislators were so influenced by the beauty of the White City that on their return they pushed for the New Jersey government to create legislation creating a park system. The area of the city of Newark was too small for their canvas. They expanded their vision to include the entire county, creating a county-wide park commission in 1894, the first in the entire country. They hired Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. to create the master plan. He, of course, was the landscape architect of the fair. And a year later, Olmsted created the jewel in the crown of the county park system, Branch Brook Park. The other parks in the system were then designed by his son and stepson, Frederick Law Jr. and John Charles. Their work in Essex County encompassed over 30 parks and parkways, from the smallest, which is Riverbank, at less than 11 acres, to the largest, South Mountain Reservation, with over 2,000 acres and a zoo. The size and diversity of the county park system is comparable to the park systems of Chicago and Boston, also designed by the Olmsted firm. And the Olmsted stayed in Essex County, stayed with the park system till the 1950s. So the parks are very uniform and very well maintained as far as the Olmsted features that make them famous. Along with the Essex County Parks Commission, the City of Newark founded a City Planning Commission to create an overall design for growth. Although at this point Newark was almost fully developed, the City Planning Commission worked to remove unsightly billboards, overhead wires and signs, and bring public artwork to the older municipal parks. If you travel through downtown Newark today, you'll see many of these monuments, such as the Wars of America in Military Park and the Columbian in Lincoln Park. The City Beautiful movement also advocated the use of the most modern and scientific methods to address the social needs of urban residents. The photographs of Jacob Riss showing the degrading conditions and filth that many men, women, and children lived in appeared in popular magazines and books and spurred many reformers to concentrate on cleanliness and beauty. Franklin Murphy, the Varnish King of the Ironbound, who was soon to become governor of New Jersey, became emblematic of the successful late 19th century industrialist that became increasingly concerned with issues of social welfare, and he was the major force behind the establishment of Riverbank Park. Murphy owned the largest varnish factory in the city, which was one of the most major industries in Newark at the time. Newark was the largest producer of varnish and leather in the 19th century. Contrary to general late 19th century practice, Murphy had a research laboratory built. He hired chemists to supply the best varnish that he could possibly create, and had a motto, nothing short of the best. He established insurance and pension plans for his employees, which was very progressive and mostly unheard of. Murphy took a particular interest in the development of Riverbank Park, where many of his factory employees lived. In the 1910 Essex County Park Commission report, he states, although it is the smallest of 12 parks, even in its unfinished state, one of the most largely used, and is an example of the wisdom and importance of locating breathing spaces in thickly settled portions of the community. Attendance records from the time showed over 20,000 children per summer month attending Riverbank Park. Children were fully supervised by instructors and were taught proper use of gymnastic equipment, as well as playground exercises and dances. And the area that you see in front of the field house was used for patriotic exercises, was used for flag raising, drills, songs. Children were taught civic responsibility, sportsmanship, and healthful living. In some cases, children would be dropped off and taken care of by the teachers while their mothers went to work. Immigrant children were provided means of easy integration into American society. Teams were sponsored by the parks, which would then participate in inter-park competitions and pennant races. Winning teams got to fly their pennants at the flagpoles, and parties and dances were also sponsored by the parks. The design of Riverbank Park is as important as its history. The Olmsted brothers responded to the growing role of active recreation in the small urban park at the same time as they reserved the larger parks for more naturalistic settings. You have to understand that at the time, playgrounds, field exercises, gymnastics, this was all very new. And this was a big change from previous parks where people just sat on benches or strolled, promenaded. These were actually active areas for youth and children to exercise. The Olmsted philosophy of design was to provide settings for people of all classes. The Olmsted plan for the county included 3 types of parks: small urban parks, which were called the lungs of the city, such as Riverbank; larger scenic parks, such as Branchbrook and Weequahic; and suburban reservations, such as South Mountain and Eagle Rock. The size, the activities, and treatment of nature distinguish the 3 types of parks. The smallest green spaces contain traditional outdoor activities and sites for newly developed recreation, such as field games, athletic exercises, playgrounds, parades, open-air concerts, etc. For instance, in Independence Park, which was founded as Eastside Park, there is a gazebo that's one of the original features of the park, which was used for open-air concerts. Olmsted proposed that every neighborhood have several of these small parks, and that their recreational facilities be placed in formalized natural settings. And of course, as you know, there are only 2 such parks in Ironbound. For 50,000 people, there's only a total of 23 acres of parkland. Riverbank Park is an outstanding example of the small urban park. In a very small area, Riverbank Park has a grandstand and a baseball field, a soccer field, a 1/5 of a mile track, tennis courts, playground, shelter, field house, as well as naturalistic paths and plantings. Formal rows of sycamores border the park and provide a transition from the regular geometry of the street grid to the green space. A naturalistically designed area with curvilinear paths and informal plantings of mature specimen trees and shrubs in the middle of the park screen both the sight and sound of the major recreational spaces from each other, as well as providing parkland along the Passaic River. As you walk through the park and you walk along the central pathway, you realize there's a total change in topography. The more active areas are separated from the more passive areas by stairs and by hidden walkways. Changes in grade and more formal plantings further subdivide the recreational areas. Riverbank Park also contains notable architecture in the shelter, field house, and grandstand. All of these were designed by architects notable in their day. And the field house is actually one of the original elements of the park, because the park was originally much smaller than it is today. The grandstand and shelter came a little bit later. The park was originally only from the center walkway next to the baseball stadium and extended to the east just over here to Somme Street. Originally 2 blocks of land were purchased in 1907, and it was the only open land in this whole neighborhood. It wasn't covered by buildings. It was the site of an old decrepit mansion where a woman had to be forcibly evicted in order to build this park. The county immediately placed a temporary playground on the site and commissioned the Olmsted firm to design the park. The 2 city blocks were joined into one track, giving the park approximately 6 acres. The park was then divided into separate places for young children, older boys, and quiet passive recreation for adults. Initially, the women weren't considered. The field house had showers on one side for boys, showers on the other side for men, no facilities for women. Women weren't expected to exercise. Sand courts and playground equipment was built for the youngest, and gymnastic equipment set up for the older children. The showers were meant to provide a clean lifestyle because a lot of people didn't have indoor plumbing at the time, and it was to encourage people to lead a healthy lifestyle. The establishment of the Passaic Valley Sewer in 1924 had a major impact on the area. Up until the time of the establishment of the Sewer Authority, all household and factory waste was dumped directly into the Passaic River. It must have just been an incredible sight, and the stench must have been overwhelming from the debris and the garbage and other things that were dumped into the river. But in 1924, a sewer was actually built, and a lot of the sewage was pumped into a treatment plant rather than into the Passaic River. And as a result, the county took the opportunity to purchase the land that's across Raymond Boulevard to form a green bank for Riverbank. At the same time, they purchased the site of the former Ballback Smelting Works immediately to the west. The park was nearly doubled in size to the west and to the north. The smelting plant unfortunately raised its ugly head when the park was closed for contamination during our great battle to save the park, because they realized that the soil was contaminated from all of the smelting operations had gone on here for many, many years. But in 1927, when all the additional land was purchased, the Olmsted firm was called on to design and enlarge the park. The baseball field and grandstand were added, and the old 1910 field house was renovated and a new playground shelter was built. By 1930, the park was complete. Unfortunately, a planned tunnel or a bridge, they were both planned, to the riverfront section was never built, and now it's rather inaccessible. Today, Riverbank Park reflects the second Olmsted design of 1927, although there are elements of the 1907 design remaining, such as the field house, the area in front of the field house, and the promenade. The remainder of the park is from the second campaign. The recent renovation of the park has added another chapter to its history. I think the Olmsted brothers would be very proud to see how beautiful Riverbank Park looks today and how we have appreciated the thoughtfulness of their design. Spark has gone to great lengths to save not only the park and its buildings, but also its plantings, especially its majestic, mature trees. There was a time 10 years ago when we were all ready to chain ourselves to these trees in order to save them. It is frightening to know how close we came to losing them. Today, let us impart our passion for Riverbank Park to the next generation. We must educate them to know that nothing in life is guaranteed and that you have to fight for what you believe in. Riverbank Park is with us now, and we have become vigilant guardians of its existence. The future of the park is up to the generations to come after us. My wish is for the park to celebrate many, many, many more birthdays and to continue making living history. Thank you.
Ulana, perhaps people have questions for you?
I thought that maybe we took questions after you do it so we could do
That sounds good. I was not expecting to be speaking today, but since there is a little extra time because Dr. Price is in here, we thought we would just quickly go over a little of the recent history of this park, which is a fascinating story all on its own. And I have to thank Ulana because when we began this fight, none of us knew anything about the history of this park. I don't think. At least I didn't. I knew nothing about the history of this park. I knew only that we had 50,000 people in this community and we had 20 acres of recreational space, and we needed to have, we needed to save this park. So we really had no idea in the beginning. What happened in 1995 was that we heard that there was something was going to come to take our park away. There was going to be a sportsplex built, and there were rumors that were circulating in the community, but for a long time nothing happened. And then their financing fell apart and nothing happened. Finally, in the spring of 1996, in the Maplewood Record newspaper, which is a suburban newspaper in Essex County, there was a long article published that a friend of ours who saw and called and said, did you see the newspaper? They're going to take your park away and build a sportsplex in your park. So we did not hear a thing. I mean, one of the things that happens, as most of you know, with developments, I had to laugh because someone from California sent me an article recently about the developer's Bible. And one of the first rules is keep everything secret as long as possible. And certainly in this case, it was followed to the T. Everything was kept completely secret from the community. The plans were in existence, and the local councilman at that time, Henry Martinez, was acting as a consultant. He was being paid by the developer of the baseball stadium. He was getting a fee. So when we found out about the what was going to happen or what was planned to happen here, it was quite late. There's an old saying that that people say, it's a done deal, and we said this a lot. It's a done deal, it's over, you can't do anything. It was very late before anything was even found out about the plan. Over that summer of 1996, we began to hold community meetings, and we formed the organization SPARK. And SPARK stood for Save the Park at Riverbank. Save the Park at Riverbank. The acronym comes from that. And in the fall of 1996, the first thing we did was get a lawyer. It was very late. We were trying to save the park. We went to court. We did not win in court, but what one of the judges did say to us, which turned out to be very helpful later on, was that the developer had to follow all the legal requirements. All the laws had to be followed in the process. And later on, that phrase that the judge issued or stated that day turned out to be important. It was right around this time that the county closed the park. They actually did what I consider to be illegal pre-construction testing. They dug into the ground where the old smelter used to be, and they found toxics about 8 feet down and brought them up. And of course they said chemicals. There are chemicals on the park. And they closed the park, except that they actually didn't close it. They left it open, but they put up a little sign saying it's closed for use. The community continued to use the park because it was open and because we need to use the park for every purpose. And in fact, some people decorated the city, the big blocks of concrete that had been put on the ground. I don't know what they were supposed to block because anyone could walk right around them. And someone put a beautiful sign on them and said, reopen our park, restore our park, you know, so. And people continued to use the park, and people came in, and since the county had stopped cleaning the park, Spark members began to clean the park weekly on Saturdays. And that was going on for a while. One of our goals was to get a public hearing about the park. And in October of '96, we were finally able to get a public hearing held. It was at the Portuguese Sports Club, where we have many events, many public meetings. And there were probably close to 1,000 people at the meeting. And all the people were saying, please don't take away our park. That was October 19th of 1996. The very next day, at simultaneous meetings, so that there was no way that we could have been at both meetings. They were held exactly the same day, same time. The Essex County Board of Freeholders and the City Council both approved the ordinances, which basically said the project could go forward. So needless to say, we were absolutely outraged. On the night of the public hearing, we were so happy, so many people, everyone saying, save the park. And the very next day, I tell you, wasn't it like being on a roller coaster? The very next night, they went ahead and voted totally the opposite from what the people said. And that you would say that we were at that point, we were very concerned, and we had no idea what would happen. But one of the things about Spark, I mentioned this the other day, we had two rules. One was never get depressed all on the same day, never get discouraged all on the same day. So we always kept going, and we kept determination. And the second thing was to constantly come up with new strategies. So when a door closed on us, we had to think of something else to do. And what we did next was to begin working on a citywide referendum, which is a very unusual thing that can be done in cities, but it is hardly ever done because it is very hard. It requires gathering 4,000 names of registered voters, or it's actually a certain percentage of whoever happens to be registered voters at that time. It is difficult to do that. But because of the timing of this, of these events, we were coming into a presidential election. It was the first Tuesday in November was going to be the presidential election. And at the presidential election, everyone goes out to vote. Many, many more voters than you have for your normal elections or Board of Education elections. And so we knew that timing would be key. And the petitions had to be created by a lawyer, had to draw up special petitions. That lawyer was Ira Karazic. He prepared everything. And on that day, we stood outside the polling places. And on that day, we got over half of the signatures that we needed to get. And we knew every one of those signatures would be good because they were all voters going to vote. We had to get the rest of the names. It was not an easy project. And then when we turned them into the clerk of the city of Newark, the clerk challenged our names and said they were not registered voters. And we had to go through another process where we took the clerk's responses back and we said, what my sister's on this list. Some people said she's definitely a registered voter. Why did they cross her name off? So there were constant obstacles that had to be overcome in this. And we found that many of the signatures which they had disallowed were indeed valid. In the meantime, we were holding demonstrations. One of the very low points of the fight to me was when there was a demonstration here outside the park in which the Little League marched with our former mayor, and they thought they had been promised that they could use the Newark Bears Stadium for their games, which of course, since the stadium has been built, and we have seen that no local teams have been using it on a regular basis. That was really a lie at that point in time. And when we were here at the park, there was a demonstration where the Little League came with the mayor opposing the people who were trying to save the park. And they said, we know why you're fighting to save this park. We know that you don't want African American people in your park. And we said, that is totally true, it's totally untrue. But I, myself, found that to be the most discouraging day of all the time that I have lived in Newark, because our leaders were saying that everything we were doing to save this park was because we were racist. And I found that to be very, very horrible. We were trying to save the park for everybody. And if you look at this park now and who uses it, we have people, black, we have Latino, we have Portuguese, we have white, we have all kinds of people here. When the city finally said they will have the referendum, and all of these steps that we took, where the doors were closed in our face, were useful because they bought us time. The developer who wanted to build the stadium was on a time clock. He had to build it by a certain time. He had to have shovel in the ground. And everything that we did delayed the construction and the beginning of the construction, and that was helpful in helping us to win. So the referendum was held in March of 1997, and guess what? Ironbound lost. Why? Because it was a citywide referendum. We do not have enough voters to beat any citywide referendum. And Rick Cerrone was off in the North Ward driving around in a convertible and throwing a lot of money at people and trying to get the votes. And Ironbound lost that citywide vote, but we did in our own community, of course, we won the vote because people down here wanted to save the park. The local historic commission began talking about the park, and Elizabeth Del Tufo was very instrumental in that. They tried to pass a resolution to get the city to make it designated as a historic place, but the city refused to do that. And along the way, we had many helpers. I mentioned this the other night. There were statewide and national organizations. And we also were writing a lot of letters. People were writing to the governor of the state, and it was church people, it was families, it was children, everyone was writing. There were some people who were good with cameras, were taking pictures of all the people playing in the park and sending them. We were also writing to the National Park Service because they also had a role in this fight, because this was a park that was built with tax dollars, a Green Acres Park. And when you take away a Green Acres Park, there is a law that says the park has to be replaced by another park with equal acres. And that was the law that the county had to obey, and they were very late in doing so, which helped us to win. We were sending letters in, and the National Park Service was also sending them to the White House, to the Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, so that the White House, the national people also knew about our fight to save the park. In September of 1997, we went with Ulana. By that time, the application was finished to make it designated as a historic site. And we all went to Trenton. Many of us rode down to Trenton with Ulana, and we were in the room, and there was a big conference table with commissioners sitting around it, 15 commissioners. Ulana presented her material, her slides, her pictures, the stories about Franklin Murphy, about Frederick Olmsted, about how this park got started. And she laid that out so beautifully to the commissioners. And when they took a vote, it was a unanimous vote that the park was a historic place and it should be saved. So, was the park put on the historic register? No, because the recommendation from the commissioners, he said they recommend unanimously that it be designated. He took the paper, he put it under a pile of papers on his desk, and he never signed it. Why? Because politicians here were telling him, don't sign it. Finally, what really brought the story to the conclusion, I think, was very, very late. Remember that all this time, the developer's getting nervous. He has to start. The National Park Service no one is going to talk to them about the law. Remember, the judge said in the beginning that all the laws have to be followed. And one of the laws was the National Park Service law. If you take away a park, you must replace the park. Essex County did not go to the National Park Service to present them with their plan. They waited and twiddled their thumbs. They were very, very arrogant because they thought that nobody could stop them and that they, being the powerful people who control everything, would just be able to get what they wanted. And so when they finally went, and it was very late, when they finally went down to the Philadelphia, the National Park Service looked at their plan and said to them, you know, this is going to take 2 or 3 years to review. And of course the developer, because he needed to begin working immediately, had to look for another location to put the baseball stadium, and that was the end of the plan to put the baseball stadium here. There was one other thing that happened, very unusual, and that was that they actually, in certain cases, things happen that aren't supposed to. Like at Weequahic Park, there was a historic stadium there, and suddenly overnight one night, a bulldozer came and knocked it down. And later on, the politicians were asked, well, why did you let them knock that down? And they said, oh, we didn't know. Contractor just did it. And we were very worried that something would happen like that here, that suddenly we would wake up one morning and find a bulldozer or trees being cut down. So we had a telephone tree, and as soon as people saw anything, they called each other and said, there's something going on in the park. So we did see that one day. We saw bulldozers, and we called the National Park Service, and they issued something very unusual. They rarely do it, and it was called a cease and desist order. And they sent it to Essex County. It said, cease and desist. That means whatever you're getting ready to do with those bulldozers, you cannot do. And that was very dramatic. And the end of the story, of course, is that the park is still here. But remember that it was closed. It was closed when the county finally decided to put the baseball stadium on Broad Street, and many of you have gone and seen the Newark Bears play in that beautiful stadium there. But we had a closed park, and so Spark had to do another job, which was to try to figure out how could the park be remediated, because since they had found chemicals in the park they now had to remediate, which means to cap the park or clean up the chemicals so that there was no problem for anyone getting sick. And so we had to find some science people. We did find many of the top science people from around the state, from Robert Wood Johnson, from Rutgers, from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and we brought them through the park, and they said, how could they have thought of destroying this park? These trees are golden, was the way they said it to me, these trees, and they were talking about the beautiful old trees. And they went with us. With Essex County, we helped figure out a plan to cap the park and make it completely safe. And we were able to hire, we raised funds ourselves to hire our own person, Daniel Dowd, who Ulana actually helped us contact. And he helped us by being sort of our eyes and ears to try to make sure that the work was done well, and that when they restored the buildings, they would be restored the way they looked in the old days, with much of the beauty of the park would not be just knocked down but replaced. And you have to realize that that was a very big thing, because the buildings were in very bad shape. And if you want to know more about how they looked before, come inside the building after this and look at the books on the table, and you'll see the pictures of these buildings that were almost demolished. They were in very bad condition. So there had to be very good work done on restoring them. And I think that brings us to the opening of the park in 2001. And then again, after they found out that the dirt really wasn't as clean as it should be, they had to bring in new clean dirt. So it was closed temporarily and reopened again finally in 2003. All of this was very hard for the community and for Spark. Some of you, David and Florence, you're here. Some of the people with the blue t-shirts on who are sitting here, they were all involved, and it was very hard. But we look around and we can't be prouder of what we have been part of than this, just to see how many people are here in the park today, how many people are enjoying the park in so many ways, young, old, sports people, and just people who like to relax in the park. This would have been gone, and we are really so proud of our role in saving the park. And Ulana, we thank you again for your comments today and for all your hard work on the park. Why don't you join me and we'll see if anyone has questions. Tien? Does anyone have questions?
Ulana, you were talking about when the park first opened, the city beautiful movement, and what was going on in the park at that point with the citizenship classes. How long did that kind of activity go on? Do you have any idea?
Probably through the 1930s, up until the beginning of World War II, because the Army took over the park during World War II. This and Weequahic Park, they took over the entire park as a coastal watch station. So all park activity had basically ceased during World War II so that they could monitor wartime activity. And then after the war, the sort of instructional services never really started back up again.
So there were troops that were actually living in that park here?
Yes, there were troops stationed here and in Weequahic. The entire park was taken over by, I think, a coastal guard, I forget the exact term of the unit that was here.
John, wait. Okay, John?
Know that this is mostly immigrant community. And we know that a lot of immigrants did not fill out the census for 2000. We know that the number 57,000 not a real number. And we have probably 100,000 people living in this neighborhood. Is there any plan for a new park? With all the development that's happening towards South Street, towards now Christie Street, in Ironbound?
There are a number of plans for new parks. Some of them are plans that the city is developing. I've heard them talk about Murray Street as a possible park site, which is down in that area that you're talking about. As you know, John, one of the problems is the lack of real planning, really good planning, so that everything meshes, so that the development matches with the open space. And of course there's a plan for the waterfront park, thank you for that, to have a park go from Penn Station all the way to Chapel Street along the water. And that's sort of, we call it our green dream. But we're hoping that with the new administration, we will be able to make progress on a new park along the water. Anyone else? Other questions?
Should we make a petition to make sure that they do that park? How many years that's going to take to do?
We are, yeah, I mean, we may have to do everything we had to do before, Dan. It depends on the administration's response, and if the at the moment they're costing out the cost of that park, and we think they have every intention, they say they are, of building it, and that but if it moves very slowly or it doesn't move at all, we will have to do some of the same things that Spark had to do to save this park. At one point the seniors made for us, and we still have some of them so we can get them out and wear them again, blue and green ribbons. And the blue stood for the water and the green for the park. And we would wear them and say, this is about the waterfront park. So we may have to start wearing our ribbons, getting our marching. We had a candlelight march along the waterfront with Mayor James when he was still in office. And he said, yes, I support you. So, so we are going to have to do probably, because that's always the way it seems like changes come. It's from people working together, and hopefully we have everybody's help in the community. And I see a lot of people in this audience, and we hope we have you all on the mailing list, and we appreciate also Mrs. Cortinez for being here with us today from South Street School, who is also prepared to help translate if we needed that. The partnerships that are happening, I said it the other day that I think the best thing coming out of this is people working together. One of the best things, besides having the park here, of course, is people working together, because, that really is very, very important.
I have one more question.
Yes.
What about cleaning the river? Right by the bridge, there's like so many bottles and garbage there. Who can we contact to do that? That's skates up the wall in the river.
Well, periodically different groups go down and clean the river, and PVSC, the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission, comes out, and they have what they call a river garbage boat.
Oh, okay.
And they go around and pick up debris. So, and of course the real answer to that is once the river starts to be used again, you'll see much less garbage, because people will be there watching and being aware of it more. And this spring, I don't know how many people saw the boats come down the river, the kayak and canoe race, and when we stood there on the bank and saw them come under Jackson Street Bridge, it was very, very beautiful, and it made you feel that the river could come alive again and could be used for boats. The new soccer stadium coming in across in Harrison, we could have our boats and just row across the river, And one thing that was very exciting this spring was a group of teenagers from one of the schools, 8th graders, I believe, or freshmen. They built their own canoes working with their staff, and they came here and they launched 4 canoes into the water. And that was extremely exciting, because they built the canoes, they studied how to do it, and they They did the whole entire job, and when you saw them go into the water, it was really, really awesome. And they were so excited, and I think this is the kind of thing that can happen more and more. Joe.
Yeah, something this may sound off your point here, but I wanted to bring this up as you both of you were talking and you mentioned about the politics that come into playing in the park or anything. A while back, some months back, Tom Moran of the Star Ledger did a story about the cleanup of the river here, and there was a picture of actually a drainage pipe on the river not far from here, walking from here, going into the river, and there was a picture there, and he was talking with the people from the state DEP about cleaning the river up. And I emailed him and I sent him a little information about our efforts to clean up Lister's Avenue site, Diamond Shamrock site, when we had the Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste was in full bloom working there to clean that site up. And which needs to be cleaned up if they're going to clean up the river. And he emailed me back that the Republicans in the state legislature are preventing, do not want to fund the money to continue the lawsuit against Diamond Shamrock to clean up that site, which was capped. It's going to be capped for 30 years, and then they're going to abandon it and so forth. But they're refusing to appropriate the money to allow the DEP to continue a lawsuit to see if the Diamond Shamrock can clean that site up, which is on the river, and which we know they had to put in a steel slurry wall to keep the water out so that it doesn't drain from leach out from the riverbank into the river. And so that was, I thought, was an interesting thing about politics that was happening in the river and how it affects us, because you're talking about cleaning up the river, and since the river is right over here, that it affects us even in the park here. But that's the way it is. Republicans don't think it's important to clean up, I guess, a site in Newark. If we have a
Well, we have a Democratic government, Joe.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. Should we make a petition about that if we wanted to really clean that?
It's a whole separate subject, and I think we should have that discussion afterwards.
Well, I was just trying to bring up the politics because you talk about the putting the river, the park on the riverfront.
It's
and
a-
all the issues.
It's a complicated discussion, Joe, because
not for here. I'm trying to get off the subject.
yeah.
So, you want
Felisa has a question.
Nancy, have they given any, specific dates when they're going to start the waterfront?
No. And again, we can talk about that later. Are there any more questions about Riverbank Park, especially the new people? Hi, Mrs. Leo. Anyone who may not have been through the fight and has a question, or Arnold, you can ask your question if it's about
The
River.
building there, what was that first invitation? What was that
It's the
first?
playground shelter.
Oh,
It's a shelter for children. They could come and play there if it was raining, inclement weather, but that's always been the playground shelter.
No, it's just amazing that they put all that for a shelter.
But
So-
every park had one.
Okay.
Every one of the Olmsted parks had one. And right outside the shelter, actually, there were sand courts.
Right, and I remember the sandbox.
Remember the
Yeah,
sand? Well,
sure, I
they
remember
called
the
them
sandbox.
sand courts, and they actually had little concrete bumpers, and they filled them with sand because the sand play was considered a very important part of
Yeah.
early childhood development.
No, and that was here until.
Right, right.
Until renovation, yeah.
I'm just curious, actually a lot of the questions I had, you answered already when you were speaking, but I know there's bulwark over there for the Wallback refinery. It's still part of it's there in the river, the big concrete bulwark that's in the river. And I know the boats used to dock there to bring in supplies for the factory and I guess take out some of the products too. Was there a bridge though? I mean, the Morris Canal was there about that time, and plus that was Passaic Avenue here. Was there a bridge over that, or did it just cross the street?
You know, I don't really know. I don't know when the Jackson Street Bridge was built. Does anybody know that? I don't. Are you trying just right over here?
Right.
No, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know that answer.
Because I mean, they'd have to cross the canal, wouldn't they, to get across?
You swim across for when they tried to walk across. I was pushed in it when I was a kid.
He remembers the Canal Gate.
Round two, like under tunnel or something.
Well, Raymond Boulevard is what was the former Morris Canal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the whole length of Raymond Boulevard and then Locke Street as it winds its way up through the city of Newark.
Underneath.
Yes, that's all the former Morris Canal. The subway tunnel, that's the Morris Canal.
All right.
I have no all the trees here, when you were saying these trees and the built this, are all these trees or most of them still original trees from when the park was built? Do you know?
I can answer that.
I think that some of the trees are original and some were added. Remember, the park was built in two phases, 1907,
Yeah.
and then it was almost completely rebuilt in 1927.
Well,
So
are
I
these
think
trees, well, that's what I'm saying, are these trees original from like 1927?
I would say some of them are, sure. Like I think probably that one right there is definitely original. And then the county maintained, while they were maintaining the park, they were replacing the trees on a regular basis. But I would say yes. You know, I'm not a tree expert, but I'm sure I know. I mean, I know some of these trees are original.
And some of them are not, because if you look at the photographs when they opened the baseball stadium, a lot of the trees were gone.
Yeah.
It's amazing. There are hardly any trees visible in the aerial photograph, which you can see inside, that shows the first day that they inaugurated the baseball stadium. There's very little vegetation visible on that photograph. So I think a lot of things came in right after that, 1920.
How long did it take to build this park? A year or two?
It came in phases.
It took about, the first phase took about 3 years, 1907 to 1910, and then the next phase was 1926 to 1930.
The park first, and did they do another half, or how did they
Well, the first half of the park is from the first half of the park was from the walkway that goes completely across the park, from the walkway to Somme Street. That was the first half of the park in 1907. And then the county bought additional land across the street on the riverfront and then west where the baseball stadium is now. So that happened in 1927. From 27 to 30, they pretty much rebuilt the park.
Wow. Had it always been a soccer field there, or that was something else at one time in your olden days?
It was something else.
Yeah, it was more. It was a ball field. It wasn't. It was a ball field for football. It had gymnastic equipment in the middle of it. The uses changed over time. Soccer is a relatively new sport for the United States. So I'm not sure when they started playing soccer here. But
That's why I asked. That's why we get
Dave has a question.
Some of these trees look like they were here from the beginning of the world.
Yes.
Did they
All
bring
right.
these trees from another place, from another park, or did they just build them when they were small and brought them here? Or how did that happen?
I think the county system maintained greenhouses, and they actually grew a lot of their plants in other parks, and then as they needed them, they planted them. And because the county park system maintained over 30 parks,
Wow, yeah.
so they had to have. I think maybe in Branch Brook they had some of these facilities where they were actually growing plants.
That's good.
Anybody else? Question? Mrs. Cortez.
It's not a question. I just wanted to thank you very much. You made my interview very informative. You're welcome. As a teacher, I learned something new.
Oh, good.
Comments about but our school is very close to the
You're welcome.
Well, one more question. What about the noise? You were trying to do something about the noise, about the traffic. Is that an issue that came up?
No, nothing we can do about that. Arnold?
When you were talking about the beautification movement, and when Murphy became governor, did he attempt to do something similar in other parts of New Jersey, or is Essex County unique in its history?
No, actually, Governor Murphy he was actually a Republican, but he was a very progressive Republican, and he tried to institute labor laws, and he founded a TB clinic in Glen Gardner. He struggled against child labor, and he was very progressive for his time. So.
No, and I just meant in terms of the other county park systems. Did they develop around the same time?
Well,
Union County, Somerset County, any other county park systems?
Well, they each had their own county park system, and Essex County was the first one, and Franklin was very involved in Essex County and in the development, particularly of Riverbank Park. But at the time Riverbank Park was developed, there were already about 12 Essex County parks. So he was fairly busy in that, and I think that after that he was involved in state business, but not necessarily in everybody's county park system.
Okay. So it's a special interest in this.
It was definitely special interest in Newark, right? And as a matter of fact, there's a statue to Governor Murphy in Weequahic Park. It's on Elizabeth Avenue, and it's the only monument to Governor Franklin Murphy in New Jersey. Yeah, there should be one in this park.
Okay, we thank you. Thank you, Ulana. Again, thank you for all your work. And that will conclude the centennial celebration for Riverbank Park. Happy birthday.